to our Conscious Earth Alliance. It's our free online Saturday conference on the theme of health, well-being, and raising your vibration. And our next speaker is Dan Winter. Dan's website is fractalfield.com and also goldenmean.info/VTI. The title of Dan's work presentation is Negentropy, Fractality, and Biofeedback for Path of Bliss versus Astral Hygiene. So that's pretty technical, and the reality is many of us will not be familiar with these concepts. So please write your questions and comments in the chat screen, so that in our, hopefully we have about 25 minutes of Q&A, we can hopefully go deeper and get some clarification on some of these concepts that are going to be very, very new for some of us.
We have Patrick with us.
Oh, we have?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
He won't be able to stay after 3:30, but it's fine. It's perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very. Can we just introduce Patrick also?
Do you want to introduce
Patrick?
Dan? You're good at it.
Yeah, please, Patrick, if you could just introduce Dan, and we'll get started.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to be here with you also, and if I can help in a way, it would be a pleasure.
That's great. So, Patrick, you've worked with Dan previously on a number of projects together, right?
Yes. Okay. Since many years now. Yes, I'm mainly involved in the biofeedback part of Dan's work.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Do you want to introduce Dan now, or Dan, you may do it yourself? Well, Patrick, if you wish.
Well, actually, I think I would like to thank Patrick for all his dedication and effort. I'm delighted that he's here. Patrick Botti is the key patient attentive to detail programmer for all of our biofeedback apps, flameinmind.com, realheartcoherence.com, iThrive.com, that's ITHRVE.com, HRV app. So Patrick has been the biologist and sacrocranial specialist who's brought reality to our frequency signature model of the mechanics of bliss. And Patrick did a great job of introducing this yesterday, and we shared the video of that already, 600 viewers. And so it's wonderful that such a team is together. I really am grateful for Patrick.
That's great.
So yes, so today's lecture, the first maybe 45 minutes or so will be focused on the pure science, the harmonic science, the wave mechanics science, the musical science, the geometry of waves, as it is the science behind bliss and charge radiance, and that then implies suggestions about the hygiene and the practice. And then the last half hour, which is an open dialogue questions, we really focus on the hygiene and making it practical, etc. In the first part, we want to understand the actual picture, the electrical picture of what enables bliss, and thus better enable us to understand. For example, if you're sitting and starting to have a bliss experience and suddenly it feels like lightning is going up your spine, sometimes named Kundalini, and the pressure appears to become very great. It's literally like inhabiting a lightning bolt. At first, you would think you're going nuts. It's a very common diagnosis for Kundalini is schizophrenia, sadly, when in fact what's happening is a form of compression which is enabling what I call inhabiting the array. I speak of as someone who's had 30 years of pretty intense Kundalini experiences and having lectured many times on the physics of Kundalini. So today, what I'd like to try to do is the title and the theme of today's lecture is called Inhabiting the Array. And what is the array? Well, and we'll use the models here before I turn the screen sharing on. This is the array. I'm speaking of only one array. This is a infinite stellation, the only possible 3D fractal dodeca, ecosa dodeca, which is all based on golden mean ratio. That is the array we're speaking of. When you extend the edge of the dodeca straight out, you get icosa, and you extend that edge straight out, and you get dodeca again. And all edge length ratios in that nest infinitely are golden mean ratio. And that enables and invites compression. And the name for that array is fractalfield.com. It's a fractal field. And if you would like to build that array, the kit is at goldenmean.info/kit. And it's called the Star Mother Kit because it is literally the mother of stars, in the sense that it is how gravity is formed. It is the seed for gravity. So when we originally designed it, we knew that infinite dodecastellation, 3D fractal, was the geometry of DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, and every living protein. What we did not know at that time, and I only proved it later by equation, but it is precisely the quantum mechanics of how hydrogen is built. The center bond of every ladder rung on DNA and the center bond of water, which is why and how hydrogen is fractal, that is self-similar, and enables implosive charge compression, initiating centripetal force, and what I call negentropy, which means self-organization. So that's the array. The other models to show you here before I turn on the slideshow, since then my image will be smaller. This is our, if you take the self-organizing torus, which is the shape, donut shape of all magnetic fields, and therefore everything in the universe, and the vortex on the center of that torus, sometimes called string theory, wormhole, is the subject of why we need to understand the array, because in that dodeca array, the vortex line up exquisitely. We call it pine cones kissing noses. And so the angle of that vortex becomes, for example, sacred alphabets. And the key to psychokinesis, when you visualize in your optical cortex, if you form a Hebrew letter based on that self-organizing golden spiral on the torus, you're actually confirming the phase angle, the tilt of the magnetic donut, which is your optical cortex, and thus enabling you to do quantum mechanics. That is to say, you're making a smoke ring whose phase angle, called making a golem, if you happen to be a Hebrew rabbi. And so when you focus on one single Hebrew letter long enough, you're stabilizing the magnetic donut, which is your optical cortex, the optical hologram, which is your mind, which is a synaptic array. And you're causing the center of that array to be centripetal at a particular phase angle, controlling the tilt angle of that donut. And if you control the tilt angle of donuts, you do everything that can be done in quantum mechanics because you're tilting donuts accurately. The other model we have here is the model of perfect embeddability, perfect nesting. And everything we're talking about today is based on the idea that there's only one geometry that allows embeddability to be perfected, which is by definition fractality mathematically, which is by definition the perfection of compression. So embeddability is not just a nice concept. For example, it's how in physics, when you have wormholes enabling action at a distance, they call it tunneling. But tunneling is enabled by that embeddability, perfect nesting. So when waves conjugate or nest in this way, they perfectly embed and enable the beginning of implosion. So embeddability is a key concept here. And finally, today we're going to be talking about non-destructive compression. And to visualize non-destructive compression, I give you the classic Bucky Fuller jitterbug. So this is a cube octahedron, which is also a stellated tetra. And if you compress to here, you compress non-destructively, you have ecosa. And then if you compress to here, you have dodeca, which is harder to see. But if you compress to here, you have octahedron, diamond lattice. And this motion is called the jitterbug, which I learned personally from Bucky Fuller. And if you compress further, and I simply rotate my hands, and I have tetra. Now that I've had the 5 platonic solids in one non-destructive cascade of compression. And Nassim, after we taught this, agreed that this is in fact a model for the physics of how superconductivity works. And it's much related to the process of Bliss, because non-destructive charge distribution begins with non-destructive compression or implosive compression. Even Einstein said, you know, if he understood non-destructive compression, he would know why an object falls to the ground. But sadly, since he never figured out what non-destructive compression was, Einstein, Stephen Hawking, and NASA never figured out why an object falls to the ground. We, on the other hand, do know, because we know how this is the cause of gravity. And for that, we will use the slides. So in the next part of this show, there's going to be so many pictures that hopefully you can't be bored, even if the conversation is you know, somewhat advanced in places. But if there's enough pictures, okay, so I'm clicking on share screen, and we have 3 different PowerPoints we're going to do part of today. The first is called the Bliss supplement. I'm selecting that screen here, Bliss supplement keynote. Okay, so this is in the beginning a review of the last talk that I did for. Oh, I picked the wrong one. Oh, one moment. Got the wrong. So the last talk I did for ConsciousEarthAlliance.com, Bliss supplement. Here we go. Bliss supplement. Oh, here we go. Wait. Longitudinal compressed. Bliss supplement. Oh, good. Okay, I'm finding my way around here. So I have 3 windows open there. So the last talk I did use some of these slides. So the key point here is to know what a conscious universe is. You know, it's very, shall we say, fashionable in physics today to talk about the universe as conscious. It's the fashionable thing. But to know what a conscious universe is starts with knowing how an array is inhabited. What makes each node in this particular array, where compression is non-destructive, enabling what we call longitudinal or compressional waves to focus there, that the inertia is shared perfectly at those nodes, enabling fractal array mechanics. Now that's the beginning of understanding why the electric field around your aura during bliss has to look like a rose, or it's not going to work. That's the basic idea of inhabiting the array. And the other thing that makes the array inhabitable is if you become centripetal enough to steer the central tornado vortex wormhole, which is centering that array. So you need to become centripetal. And this is how then consciousness expands into bliss. And really the only definition of bliss is inhabiting this larger and fractal array, which is why if you're sitting in a stone circle in a sacred forest, you've got a wonderful chance at bliss. And if you're sitting in a metal building full of steel and dead air and electrosmog, you have a horrible chance at bliss because the array cannot stabilize. This is also how pyramids work, how the pyramids are an immortality machine because they're plasma projectable. This is what gravity waves are made of. And importantly, this is how lucid dreaming and the collective unconscious propagate. So now that we've built an electric field called Therify.net, which is being used to teach lucid dreaming because it causes lucid dreaming, we can teach the physics, which is this compressional node in this longitudinal, incorrectly called scalar array, makes you coherently plasma projectable as a longitudinal wave, which is behind the idea of the ka from the ba and all that, those metaphors we use. So I'm just going to move this can here. Maybe I can move this down. Yes. In this array, the nest is made of plasma vortex. If you know what is a plasma vortex and how it becomes centripetal, then you can know what is the physics of implosion. You can know how a shaman steers tornado. You can know how plasma Therify.net heals. You can know how an elemental and an angel form. You can know what life force is inside a seed. You can know what survives death. You can know how out-of-body vision and lucid dreaming happens, the physics. You can know all action at a distance if you learn the connection between the nodes called longitudinal. You can know how hydrogen makes gravity. You can know how Gaia, Earth's Schumann field, becomes negentropic. You know, the Gaia hypothesis is that Gaia is self-organizing. Well, how and why, because the Schumann harmonics fit this cascade called phase conjugate. You can know how a soul forms in imploding DNA, how Bliss enables ensoulment. That is the difference between us and the Borgs we need to know. You can know how the Nazi bell, the Hanabu flew. You can know the principle of all zero-point vacuum energy devices. You can know the physics of consciousness itself. You can know what causes vision. A plasma tornado inside or outside your head causes vision. That's how, you know, medical doctors have documented they took their vision outside their head during their near-death experience. We now know the physics of why your eyeballs can work inside or outside your head, because that plasma vortex tornado forms an eyeball when it's compressed and steered to that implosion point. We're learning, for example, how children see without their eyes. So this is the physics of consciousness itself. And then this will teach us what is the physics of ascension itself, that when more and more axes of spin symmetry are superposed in the rotations around this array, called going to the next dimension or the next density, the physics is the harmonic inclusiveness, which enables compression in that array. So, and also you can know how body parasites and astral parasites get toasted. In other words, if you got Bliss, you don't got parasites, astral or stomach parasites. And the physics of that is this implosion process, because it becomes self-organizing and therefore self-sorting. And that's what kicks out the parasites. So these are the images we used before for the vortex that form in that array. And this is how the golden mean ratio functions in that array, that series called golden mean allows you can add any two numbers and get the next one infinitely, or you can multiply any number in the sequence by 1.618, golden ratio, and get the next number infinitely. For example, 1.618 squared is 2.618. So that ability to both add and multiply, called arithmetic and geometric progression, was known before me. What was not known before me is that is the recipe for the only form of constructive wave interference that enables perfect, infinite, non-destructive charge compression. And that's why it is the cause of gravity. Einstein knew infinite compression was the cause of gravity, but he didn't know what a fractal was and didn't know what perfect, non-destructive compression was electrically. So these are some of the visuals we used, and we agreed that we're not going to do the equations today, but if you would like to see the equations, and these we have published on the physics, and I do mean the physics of how golden ratio is the cause of gravity, for example, in the radii of a hydrogen electron shells, as per my equation here. All the equations are at fractalfield.com/vacuum energy, or fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity, and you can look at the wave mechanics. It's really quite simple. If you take the path which allows waves to add and multiply constructively, recursively, which only golden ratio allows, you then produce a path where charge compression can become charge acceleration, and we'll talk more about that. So this is the classic slide. Then if you arrange those vortex into that dodeca array, you get only this geometry of vortex, which is a 60-degree perfected light cone. And you see the side view of the 10 golden spirals self-organizing on that vortex is the caduceus of Hermes, which is called phase conjugation in physics, a conjugation of phases, which is recursive adding and multiplying, as in having conjugal relations among waves. And that enables this process where the transverse up and down component of electromagnetic wave here, the up and down component is perpendicular to the direction of propagation, so it doesn't propagate efficiently. But if the wave called transverse EMF enters from the left and translates vorticity constructively, called optimized translation vorticity, it emerges here at the Planck threshold as, instead of a transverse wave, as a longitudinal wave on the right, which is a compressional wave, sometimes incorrectly called scalar, where the compression wave is traveling parallel to the direction of propagation and therefore enables efficient propagation. However, that compressional component within the wave, for example, all of radio and communication scientists on planet Earth uses a transverse component, and none of it uses a longitudinal, because we don't know how. And yet that seems to be how the collective unconscious works. So maybe we should learn. So learning how to make longitudinal wave mechanics, which is Therify.net is a good example, is a breakthrough for physics because it's also how mindfulness propagates. And we'll talk a lot about that. So the physics of consciousness itself, this process of ascension, is how conscious focus compresses charge, and vision occurs when people see from outside their body, and how blindfolded kids start seeing without their eyes. They all say they saw through a vortex. And the imploding EEG frequencies of flameinmind.com, Patrick's programming masterpiece, when their golden ratio, alpha, beta, gamma, enable the perfect squeeze on the plasma vortex that caused the plasma tornado inside your head to form an eyeball. And every single one of those kids who start seeing without their eyes, they go into trance bliss. They say, oh, I saw a wormhole, a vortex open inside my head behind a blindfold. And through looking through that vortex wormhole, I could see. And the vortex wormhole, just like a tornado, does not form an eyeball unless perfect relaxation, called trance or bliss, golden ratio brainwave harmonics, enabling the squeezing down of that vortex to a foci we now know needs to be tuned to Planck, and we'll see that in the equation. So this is why ghosts require sacred space, why ball lightning is demonstrably responsive to telepathy, why cold spots measure the presence of ghosts. This is how and why death visions are contagious, as in Ray Moody. So in the last lecture, we explained now that that conversation about forming that perfect array explains why you can teach and measure bliss, ecstasy, with a very particular frequency series, harmonic series of brain waves, sacrocranial harmonics, breath harmonics, heart rate variability harmonics, binaural beat bliss audio harmonics. And Patrick has dedicated his life to programming that, and he's an expert. And also then we can do it in plasma harmonics, Therify.net. We can do it in architecture. We can design architecture to create bliss because we know what the capacitive frequency signature needs to be. And this produces the cascade, which Patrick was kind enough to show yesterday. This is my original equation named origin of biologic negentropy, literally the universe's only path out of chaos. And all I did was I took the musical signature of the universe, which is called Planck, Planck length and time. Every wave that physics has ever measured divides evenly into Planck in length and time. And that is clearly the only way the universe is quantized. So you take that musical key signature of the universe and you multiply by golden ratio, and then golden ratio, and then golden ratio again, and keep doing that. And you get the array I just showed you, which then you see here predicts 3 exact radii of hydrogen. It predicts the adenosine diphosphate, ADP, ATP, the cell's most important molecule. It predicts the only 2 exact frequency colors of photosynthesis, exactly. It predicts the definition of sacred dimension, the British foot, and how that embeds in all other sacred dimensions. Sacred dimensioning is defined by charge embeddability and nothing else. It predicts the Schumann harmonics, the brainwave harmonics for bliss. It predicts the LF 0.959 hertz frequency of the Mayer wave, which is the most important frequency of the blood and the breath, which is the LF component of the HRV. It's the 0.1 hertz breath that heart math calls heart coherence. It's that breath alone, which enables the spine liquid pump. So that 0.1 hertz is profound. It predicts the Venus year, Earth year, galactic year, precessional year, etc. So that is the path out of chaos for waves, literally, being the path of perfect charge collapse and the fractal field. So this is a summary of what we just talked about. So now, you know, that might get a little bit technical at some point. Let's stop the share here. Okay, so one moment here. So my idea at this point was, since some people might say, well, you kind of blew me away with technicalities. Supposing you're a visual person, we have a set of visuals which better enable the visualizing of wave mechanics. You know what I found out when I was in 10th grade studying geometry, I eventually became a geometry teacher, was that the point at which you can keep visualizing everything the teacher is talking about gives you psychokinesis, ability, literally leverage on those waves. But if you can't visualize, then you're in trouble. So for that, we have an excerpt from the original slideshow. And this is a slideshow we presented at conferences around the world for many years. And this slideshow, let me just see if I hide from you. Show grid video. Okay, let's see if I can. Bliss supplement. This is, I'm looking for Implosion full sequence video. Longitudinal compressed. Yes. Too many movies, too little time. Those are famous actors. I'm getting there though. It went to auto full screen, which made it a little trickier, but we have it. Okay, so this is the original set of visuals that were used in world tours for almost 20 years, guys. But you see, the famous visual on what is cymatics actually was a visual on dodecaecosa generated within pure wave mechanics. You can actually generate on a viscous liquid surface with the right musical harmonics the shadow of the dodecaecosa as a wave mechanic. And what are these wave mechanics doing? They're making a standing wave. And mass, for example, is a name for a standing wave and nothing else. So learning how to make waves stand, which is to say non-destructive interfere or constructive interference, eventually generates the perfect array, which, as we'll see later, is what Nature magazine called the reason the masses in the universe are a dodecahedron, because the only solution to constructive wave interference. And so the constructive wave interference generates the archetypal pair of vortex forms and the donut. So we're beginning to be able to, the idea of this slide is I'm about to show you that that same array I started with, the dodecaecosa, cube inside, is literally the only definition of the atomic table. So I'm going to show you how electron shells are made of only this. So to see how an electron shell forms in a compression wave called charge, the ether, visualize what's happening on the surface of water in cymatics. And when those waves, so when those waves converge and add and multiply constructively by golden ratio, you get the caduceus, which is that form. And enabling, actually the three axes of spin of the photon we see later is the physics of color, but that's some of the advanced material. So the waves start by nesting tetracubically. And when you nest waves tetracubically, you form pairs of vortex. For example, this is the only physics that enables lasers to phase conjugate, called four-wave mixing. It's tetracubic and therefore create time reversal, negentropy, and the fun stuff. So understanding pairs of vortex, we call it pine cones kissing noses, symmetrically opposing is critical. And this creates a series of membranes called ring pass knot, which is basically wave interference geometry. We later learned that the radii of these concentric spheres is defined by dodecaecosa. So we're using this as an example to describe the perpendicularities of the solar equator, the galactic equator, the universe equator, that equators nutate and precess in a tetracubic lattice structure. So assuming how three superposed axes of symmetry could exist within one structure. So now you see what it is to be 3D. What if you needed to know what it is to be 5D? You'd have to superpose more, and we'll later see that that's the dodecaecosa is the solution. The next X is a superposed spin. And this is just another visualization. You see the tetracubic enables basically the fact of a tetracubic in vortex compression language is in fact a nest of 4 vortex. And then to embed non-destructively in the next dimension, as it were, you enable a cube to rotate, and the edge of that cube is 0.618 to the edge of that dodeca. And so this ability of embeddability of the cube in the dodeca is the transition point within that perfect star mother nest, the perfect array, where it goes from a tetracubic, which is crystallizing and stabilizing, to dodecacosa, which is implosive, and that's the transition point. And here's how you see the dodeca within the, here's how you see the dodeca within the ecosa, and implied is the cubic. We worked for many years with Jonathan Quinton. Here, we're actually showing that if you map the vortex in that array, you see the golden ratio in that vortex. So the caduceus is there, and we're later going to rotate that, and you'll see the physics of the origin of what's called the Holy Grail. And this is an invitation to understanding fractality itself. This is another animation of how you see a wave inside a wave inside a wave, because the end of those waves is actually folding into itself. And here you see the 12 light cones are each a vortex into this dodeca. And if you see it from the side, you see that there would be 12 like that in that dodecacosa. And if you make the dodeca then semi-translucent, you can see the perfect embeddability. So this is just a visualization of perfected charge compression, which then is the solution to every single problem physics has ever had, whether it's alchemy, urban design, or the history of computing, or getting memory through death. The answer to every one of those problems is non-destructive compression, the cause of gravity as well. This, we're talking about, if you understand the pairs of vortex, you can understand why magnetic north-south, centripetal or centrifugal, is the key, for example, to pain reduction. So our terms yin and yang and north-south magnetics are all simply about the concept of centripetal, centrifugal. For example, the north pole of the magnet reduces the pain of the toothache. The south pole increases the pain, but increases the healing rate. And that difference is important. So these are called perpendicularity of flux lines. And in the one axis is called electric, and the perpendicular axis is called magnetic, but it is the same flux. So this is an introduction to the way in which gravity holds atoms together. And the whole point of seeing this part of the slideshow was to then look at the atomic table as a nest of smoke rings, but more particularly, the geometric basis for the periodicity of the elements. It turns out that the nuclear geometries are only the same array that I showed you, dodecacosa, is the geometry of the nuclear hadrons, and it is the geometry of the electron shell array. And we'll just show those pictures briefly, just to get the flavor. This is from chemist Moon's work. The geometry of the hadron's nucleus, tetracube octaecosa. This model is the physics of how the nuclear hadrons are nested. Then if you go to the electron shells, SPDF suborbitals is the entire atomic table nested. And the S suborbital we now know is a simple donut. The P suborbital is tetracubic, 3 pair, 6 electron. The DNS suborbital, 5-7 spin pair, 10-14 vortex, 10-14 electron, are ecosa-dodeca. If you built the SPDF suborbital electron shell geometrics and then interdigitate them, you're finished. The atomic table is built. Hello, that's called an array. So again, we're not going to belabor this point. I'm just showing you that, for example, when Leadbeater and Besant first wrote occult chemistry and proved that they predicted the geometry of subatomic particles before quantum physics got there, the clairvoyants got it first. Hello, that's called psi perception of quarks. I think it's so cool. I knew some of those people. This is what they saw when they looked at subatomic structures. This is from clairvoyant vision. And we now know what clairvoyant vision is. It's longitudinal interferometry, and we know how to produce it. It's so fun. So anyway, the cause of gravity is this implosion. Let's supplement. How many of the slides are we allowed to show before we run out of time here? So this is Walter Russell saying the same thing. You interfere one wave geometry, hydrogen, and you do the interference pattern, and you get the atomic table. Hello. So non-destructive interference is the atomic table, basically. And we have so many graphics of this. This is my original 3D printer plots of that platonic nature of electron orbitals. And this is the smoke ring cymatic of it. And now we take the superposed 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. The 5 are obviously dodecacosa, the 7 spins tetracubic. And that slip knot called Anu, you'll see, is in fact the symmetry of the heart of the sun and the heart of hydrogen. So here it is, the same Anu at the center of hydrogen as seen by the clairvoyants. And when they drew this Anu, what they meant was 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside, which is 5-spin dodecacosa, and 7 spins is the spin symmetry axes of tetracube. So again, too many pictures, too little time. Here's the s orbital, the pi suborbital. And now you understand why then when you get to dodecacosa, do you get non-destructive compression? Because it is scale invariant. It can change scale without changing ratio. That is how you get through death, my friends, right there. You want to know? That's the answer. It's called non-destructive compression. And if you're angry, that waveform cannot compress well. Hello. So, and if you take the golden spiral on that torus, we'll eventually show that's the original alphabets. And this was the Star Mother Kid animations. And so we have to move to the next slideshow here. We're not going to finish. But here's this is supposed to animate. Oh yeah, it's a slow animation. But you see the dodecacosa stellation fits inside and outside the tetracubic. And so you take the 3, 4, or 5 spin, and it's all golden spiral. 3 spin, 4 spin, 5 spin. So it's the same spiral that enables that embedding. And that's why charge compression, for example, hydrogen uses that geometry. And that's why then it is key to nature, because logarithmic growth unpacking begins with perfect packing. And that's literally the instruction manual for Bliss, which we hope to get to here. So this is called scale invariance equiangular spiral, so that if I wanted to write a message to God, who existed at the center of this spiral at 1 billion cycles per second, and I'm out here at 8 cycles per second, the way I send a message to God is by ratio down that spiral, because the first wave bounce establishes an angle that continues forever. That's called equiangular, sending phone calls to God, the physics implied in the definition. Why golden spiral is the definition of beauty, and the 7-fold flow form. And that became the equation right there on the screen. That's how I wrote the first equation, which I then designed the imploder.com, the vortex geometry by which we heal water. So now we go to the Bliss supplement, the last slideshow here. One moment. That was for longitudinal compression, 166, one moment.
Before you continue, is it time for questions or not? You want to finish your slides first?
As you wish, Valerie. Really, I'm so flexible here. I'm flexible. You want to have a little dialogue first? Go ahead.
There was a list of questions, and I don't know who wrote them. I wrote them down on the chat. Maybe you can look, and you can select one. They are all in capital letters, so you will see this as questions for you.
Okay. More questions for Dan here. I see the questions.
Ask where he can find more of your material. So I advise goldenmean.info, and loads of videos, of course, a lot of interviews.
Yes, our YouTube channel is youtube.com/Dan Winter Fractal Field, 300 films, 1.3 million views. And the main index, fractalfield.com.
Oh, can you write it down, or YouTube? What?
youtube.com/Dan Winter Fractal Field.
Dan Winter
and
Fractal Field.
Yeah, and at fractalfield.com you also find our blog on Facebook. So we have about 20,000 on YouTube and about 15,000 on Facebook. So the question, is it that we are trying to become more phase conjugate to create more longitudinal waves? Yes. Because being that phase conjugate lets us experience higher states such as bliss. No, that's literally exactly what we're saying, is that when you enable that compression, that the transverse up and down waves organize down the vortex and become compression focused on center. And that enables the conversion of inertia, where the toothpaste squeezed out through the tube, the tip of the tube of toothpaste, at the Planck threshold, where the wave goes from transverse to longitudinal or compression. And that interference pattern is actually what enables. You know what, Valerie, though? My next slideshow, there's only a few more, are specifically an answer to that question. Okay. So I think maybe I will go back to that.
Which question right now? Sorry.
Is it that we are trying to become more phase conjugate? Is that what enables us to become more longitudinal, have more bliss? That question. Okay. That's specifically the next slideshow, the last one. longitudinal compression. Let me just see if I can do this right. So that this golden ratio fractality is what enables black holes to form, and literally mindfulness to form, because it's what enables a center to form in a waveform. So the reason physicists didn't learn why an object falls to the ground is because they didn't learn why anything is centripetal. Becomes centripetal, you assume this fractal geometry, for example, golden ratio in brain waves, and then the aura around your body becomes longitudinal and therefore compressional. That's called the Ka from the Ba, or the Ba from the Ka, actually. It's called the rainbow light body, the Kesjan body. There were many names for this. This is like if you see ball lightning across the road, how do you get it to move? You talk to it. Because these plasma fields, when they're conjugate toroidal, they become telepathic. Literally, this is DNA radio. This is more a review of the main web links we just spoke about, our main web links here. So that the universal physics of the vacuum is simply a superfluid, and the charge media, which is the only substance in the universe, compression and rarefaction of the charge, travels as a superfluid. And when you can visualize that for yourself, you can understand the infinite communication of all of biology. The compression and rarefaction of charge, sometimes called yin and yang, is simply plus and minus charge. And propagating that, when it rotates, it stores inertia called mass, and has a period, the only definition of time. So electric fields are a superfluid. Visualize it like water. And that introduces the idea of fractality. Perfected is recursion, perfected is embedding, perfected is self-similarity, is compression, perfect is implosion, is entanglement, perfect is phase conjugation. So all these terms are synonyms. Do you see that? Centripetal force. So sacred space is where the waves can meet non-destructively and exchange that inertia, that DNA radio. Literally the sacred dodecacosa Earth grid of planets. And the way that's measured, we show 3 ways that's measured with capacitors. It's called measuring life force. That's what we do, goldenmean.info/architecture. And we agree with Korotkov, who did a lot of that work originally. So the person asking about longitudinal waves, here are the animations. So the solution to, and the nature of mind, is the perfect flame, the fire that does not consume, because it is the enabling of non-destructive distribution of longitudinal waves. This golden ratio phase conjugation enables the centripetal implosion, which creates mind, the radiance of a field into an array called mind. So you notice, a very practical example, you're walking in the store and you step under a mercury vapor light, and you notice that your mind is smaller. The physics is because the electric field of that mercury vapor light over your head is poison to your aura, because it's opposite fractal, opposite to conjugate, opposite to embeddable, opposite to charge distribution, and therefore prevents mindfulness. That's why in your classroom, when you propagate electrosmog, the kids don't have attention. If you propagate sunlight in a classroom, you measure increase in attention. If you propagate fluorescent lights at the wrong frequency, you measure the decrease in attention span. Attention is the conjugate charge implosion. That's what it's made of. Okay, so anyway, so here we're just animating that. This is how a longitudinal waves work, and this is how a transverse waves work. It looks a little, transverse waves look a little nervous there, don't they? Okay, so notice that the longitudinal or compressional or scalar wave, actually on the bottom, the direction of the wave compression is parallel to the direction of propagation. And if you line those up like this, for example, this is what they had to do to make the first nuclear explosion, named implosion. Critical mass was formed when the compression waves were aligned on the fat boy, on that sphere. You had to line up the compression waves. That's a clue, and here's a clue. You could meditate on this. Bruce Caffey measured that the Earth grid magnetic line cross points reduce nuclear critical mass measurably. Has anybody ever explained that to you before? You need to know. This is why the Ark of the Covenant can non-destructively contain nukes, because we know the physics of radiation is the opposite of charge implosion. So once you understand how compression waves become centripetal, you can understand why, for example, focused human attention has measurably reduced radioactive half-life. The measurements made by Uri Geller, actually. So this is the same slide we saw before. The fractal compression causes gravity, so that when the compression wave travels down this vortex. It emerges at the Planck threshold, and the charge is released out through the speed of light at the end of that vortex. And that's how and why hydrogen makes gravity, right there. Somebody asked you why an object falls to the ground, because the charge implodes and accelerates through the speed of light at the Planck threshold. And by the way, the primary measurements faster than light, Professor Raymond Chow, are golden ratio times the speed of light, which is the smoking gun proof of my equation. Okay, so more on this, I'm going to stop here because Valerie wanted to ask a question, which is great. I just wanted to make this one last point. Here's some more of the publications. But here is Tom Bearden proving that phase conjugation longitudinal waves are gravity waves. I mean, here's the mathematics, and are the reason plants grow. I repeat, the reason that plants grow. For example, simple experiment, try it at home. Copper sheet on the roof, wire connects to another copper sheet in the basement. Turn off all the lights, it's pitch black. Guess what? The plants will grow in the basement. Why? Because the longitudinal wave got there from the sun, which is the compression. So the solution is compression is the cause of growth. That's why Therify.net is famous for triggering plants growth. Like across the street from the Therify Center in Nashville, the flower shop insists all their flowers got double their life now. So this is symptoms of Einstein-induced insanity, and I carry on about why he didn't know when object fall to the ground. And we have the slide on Tesla's mistakes. Basically, this I'm going to stop here. You guys can we can do the questions, but just to say,
Stop you, otherwise
you know,
stop.
Yeah, that's right. You need to stop me, please do. but look, you know,
why don't you give something more concrete, because it's
well, no. Hey, Valerie,
can I just ask, Valerie? Can I just? Yes. Tesla's mistakes is a fascinating topic. Could you take us through it, do you think?
Yes, I could. It'll take 1 minute, I promise. Look, everybody's dreaming of energy without wires. And guess what the best example of energy without wires on the planet is? It's human bliss. And so when the builders of the pyramids used the piezoelectric pyramid structure to entrain the capacitance of the Schumann harmonics, which now are phase conjugate tuned to Planck, and that established a longitudinal wave that went around the planet, and all the pyramids were at the dodecahedral grid node points. And that established a global electrical power distribution. Worked great without wires. The pyramid builders did it, and Tesla failed. The reason Tesla failed is quite simple. He got the nodal positions where he was trying to send and receive from wrong. You got to be at the longitudinal grid magnetic line cross points. Same for Kozyrev mirrors and telepathy. The second thing is you got to get the frequencies right. And he got that wrong too. 60 hertz is a mistake. 50 hertz is exactly golden ratio to Heinz Planck. So my equation is the only way to get the frequencies right for energy distribution without wires. And this is about dodecahedral Earth grid. So I went through it. Stop share. There we go. Okay, I'm with you, Valerie.
Thank you, Dan.
Can I just ask on that Tesla? May I ask on the Tesla question? What do you think he did get right? And is it proper that we sort of have a lot of admiration for him?
Oh yeah, no, let's be clear here. I'm not insulting Tesla or Einstein. They're both absolute geniuses, and contribution was fabulous and huge in both cases. But in both cases, they also made some huge, huge mistakes. And those mistakes have reverberated for decades. Okay, so for example, Einstein calling action at a distance spooky instead of understanding longitudinal waves, and Einstein saying the speed of light with a speed limit when you know golden ratio times the speed of light is a solution to going faster. So Einstein and Tesla made some horrible mistakes too. He didn't know what longitudinal interferometry was based on, which is the whole topic of my entire talk today.
Okay, Valerie, go ahead.
My idea is always to go back to some common knowledge, and that's where I would always argue to start, because otherwise you lose. I hope not, you didn't lose people, but if you show, like we have an introduction to Dan's work, and we had a video we Ravi Shekhar Dan put online in the night, and Ravi Shekhar finished to edit it at the last minute. So we were really busy. So it's nice introduction. Thanks to Patrick. Patrick has worked many years, and he brings those concepts in a gentle and progressive way. So it's more easy to integrate. But what I asked Dan is to show your inventions, like the silky water, thanks to the water nozzle, which is all related. It's all this implosive, this golden mean ratio in the golden mean spiral, which changed totally. It's like diffuse light becomes coherent, and you have laser light. It's the same idea. Is that a good metaphor?
Yes, no, it's beautiful. And okay, in that case, maybe we dig out the pictures again here. I'll take the Bliss supplement one moment here. So to show where we implemented this in technologies, in other words, which are practical and usable in the field, that's very appropriate. By the way, this was the slide that went with that conversation about Tesla not getting the nodes correctly. So there he is out in the field trying to light those light bulbs, but those light bulbs are not geometrically positioned correctly to be on a longitudinal array. So this was, they had capacitive coupling working, but they did not have longitudinal coupling working. So they did not succeed in getting power without wires. That's the slide that went with that question. But to answer Valerie's question, so to show examples of implementation and technology. So you take my equation, apply it to brain waves, you get flameinmind.com. There's one example. Apply it to water waves, you get theimploder.com. So here's the perfect vortex. Here's the perfect vortex spinning. There it goes. So this became theimploder.com. We have the imploder shower and the triploder. And here.
Dan, are you supposed to show an animation? Because right now we have only an image.
Is that top blue nozzle not rotating?
We have just a Word document, but we don't have an animation. You're supposed to show an animation, or?
Yeah, it is animating on my screen, and I'm doing a screen share. So, you know,
re-share the screen. Maybe quit and re-share. You could help, maybe.
Well, also what would account for that would be low bandwidth on either send or receive end, but I can try that. Okay, I'm trying again.
Both
screen share again.
Recording, that's why maybe.
Oh, I see. No, see, so this is animating on my screen, but.
Oh, good. Now we can see something. We couldn't see that at all. So all the slides before we couldn't see.
So notice that the 10 spirals of the golden mean, 5 + 5, on a vortex became the CAD CAM, which then became theimploder.com, and our newest commercial product, Ultra Imploder, at fractalfield.com/Ultra Imploder, also at theimploder.com, which is designed for very high pressure and commercial duty, and it's technology that's going global. It's very powerful. Hypersolubility, silky water, much accelerated plant growth, wonderful for plants and people. About half of health conditions are failure to hydrate, and hypersolubility is the solution, obviously. And this then is applying my equation to plasma, therify.net. So essentially, the pine cones are kissing noses here. These are the frequencies that Priori used here, 310, 32, and 80. This was a clue that he, in fact, was approximating, but not getting accurate, what is now my equation, which is right here. These are the frequencies in my equation, which are directly how we feed the infrasound to the plasma to make the two pine cones kiss noses centripedally, modulating broad spectrally. So we got the phase conjugate optics in the noble gas in the plasma, and then I have a phase conjugate megahertz frequency at a 500,000 volt, 180 degrees out of phase, modulated with an infrasound frequency cascade, which is right here, these frequencies, and I get a very broad spectral pine cone kissing noses where the plasma, and you have that sweet spot here where happens to be a lady named Valerie sitting there. Look at that. And that sweet spot is where the implosion is centripetal. And so for pain reduction, acceleration of metabolism, increased circulation, onset of more negentropy. And you can read at therify.net. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of reports, and it's being used in 25 countries, and it has gone global. And we explain the root in the work of Priory and Tom Bearden at the website. You can see therify.net/static, the whole story of how it was invented based on Antoine Priory here.
Is it a good idea to have maybe Patrick explain how it works in a simpler way? How the simplify works? Is that a good idea?
Well, I'm happy to have Patrick's comment, but a short summary. So we take that low frequency cascade and we mix it with the megahertz main drive frequency, and we output that single complex wave at effectively what is audio levels available high amperage and input into a bifiller Tesla coil, which splits that wave into two 180 degrees phase opposite complex waves, and through the Tesla coil is increased to 500,000 volts and delivered broad spectrally into the two opposing Pyrex plasma tubes.
Okay, so I see Amar had a question and I wanted to say something. Amar, go ahead.
In some historical literature, I read that Tesla was financed by J.P. Morgan, and J.P. Morgan wanted to sell copper wires. He wanted a distributed system. Is this true? Was Tesla a sellout, or was he a noble scientist like you? Was it really that he had some way, maybe the Bliss energy idea that you explained? Did he have some way, a blissful way to create energy? And is that true? Was it because of wanting to sell more copper?
I think generally Tesla was sabotaged first by Tesla and Westinghouse, then J.P. Morgan. It's very true. Tesla was jeopardized every time he turned around to try to create his next vision. Absolutely. His vision was, tortured on this planet. That's for sure. And so he should be well admired. Absolutely. On the other hand, I do not think that Tesla really had a clue of how his high voltage caused micro earthquakes, which it did, because he didn't really understand the relationship of phase conjugate longitudinal to how gravity waves are made. So I think he didn't get that right. And he didn't get longitudinal interferometry right for power without wires, but he was very close. That's what his plasma beam weapon was longitudinal. So he was close, that's for sure. However, he didn't get the frequency signature and the geometry correct, I don't think. Certainly didn't know the relationship to gravity waves. And sadly, was almost entirely clueless about the relationship to human bliss, is my experience. For example, if he had a clue, he wouldn't have lived in a square metal hotel room for the last half his life. It was fatal. So no, clearly he didn't know the biology of bliss, no. But absolute hero, yes.
There's a
At one point, Westinghouse says, well, I'm going to go broke if I have to pay my contract to you for three-phase power distribution. And Tesla said, okay, don't worry about it. I mean, he was a soft-hearted guy, a good guy.
There's a question from Vitor. Vitor, you want to express your question? Your questions, maybe?
Hello.
Yes, go ahead, Vitor.
So I'm just curious, how did you found that the distance of the hydrogen radii is Planck times golden ratio up
Yes.
to 116, 117, and
Yes,
118?
exactly. Yes.
So
actually, that's a perfectly useful question. Actually, there's a scientist named Hayrovska, and you can see that in my original publications in Hydrogen. Hayrovska had shown there were dozens of radii ratios in hydrogen based on golden ratio. So he's got a bunch of papers on golden ratio in hydrogen, but he had nothing describing radius to center. So my intuition was new, which is that if I took Planck and multiplied by golden ratio, I'd get to the 3 radii. He had already shown that the distance between those radii was golden ratio, but he had shown nothing about distance to center. So once I knew that I needed to use Planck times golden ratio, I had the answer to everything, and no one had done that before. And that's the reason gravity exists.
I have a
Okay, thank you.
I have another question. Ravi Shekhar, would you like to express one of your many questions I think you had written down? Let's start with
well, yeah, some of them I think are just inappropriate. But let's have a go. In yoga philosophy, we have the idea of mental propensities in the chakras. So I think you're familiar with the chakra concept. So in yoga, there's the idea that there are mental propensities located in the chakras, and that they are psychic, but they influence the nervous system and then ultimately the glands, the hormonal glands. Now, I'm wondering your idea of phase conjugation or non-destructive interference. Presumably, these mental propensities in the chakras, what we call them vrittis, emanate waves. And I'm wondering, like, how you apply this idea of phase conjugation or implosion at the level of these mental propensities in the chakras.
You know, in general, I choose only to speak about what's measurable. And so I choose to speak about the electric fields around the glands, which has a lot of correlation to chakras literature. For example, Patrick's successful software he wrote on the musical harmonics to trigger the chakras, which is very functional, which is at ithrive.com. And later now we have the frequency drivers in flameinmind.com option, Flame in Sound, which we can trigger the specific chakras in sequence in the plasma, and it works in Plasma Fire, in Quantify. And so we know the scientific literature on the frequency signatures of the glands, which correlates well to this conversation about chakras. But to specifically answer your question, if you look at the physics of the definition of emotion in the music literature, and I spent half a lifetime on this, website is goldenmean.info/touch. And in short summary, Manfred Klein's documented by measuring the change in pressure over time in the shape of touch, which would identify emotion. For example, the shape of the way you would squeeze someone to say joy, the geometry of that pressure wave reaches max pressure at 1/6 into event duration. However, if you want to say I love you to someone, the necessary delivery of that hug, if you measure it, and it's been done 1,000 times or more, is much tantrically delayed. And the max pressure in that wave that says I love you, the hug, the geometry of pressure, is delayed tantrically until 0.618 into duration event. Now, originally Manfred Klein made those measurements, but I was the one who determined the ratios contained in the measurements. And that's all at goldenmean.info/touch, the perfect hug, the love wave, as it were, lo-fi. And the physics there is clear that if you generate an interference geometry of golden ratio in the love hug, you are clearly absolutely generating the implosion I call phase conjugation and enabling centripetal force. For example, if you measure the correct place in the birth canal where max pressure should be reached, if it is golden ratio, you will have a blissful birth. And in fact, bring memory through birth. That's an example, and there's pictures there as well. So there's a lot of literature on the physics of emotion and its wave ratio enabled. For example, another example, the wave ratio of anger is 1/7. That's the squeeze on your, if your mother is squeezing your arm saying, I'm angry with you, and you measure that wave, the max pressure will occur at 1/7 in the duration of that squeeze pressure event. And the reason for that is obvious. It is max destructive wave interference, chasing the money changers out of the temple, Jesus. But unfortunately, that wave doesn't compress well.
You had a chat explaining those wave interference very nicely, because you see at the golden mean, it's constructive. It's not annihilating.
Exactly.
Do you have this chart?
Exactly. Well, goldenmean.info/touch.
Okay.
I suppose to bring up the screen here, but it's there. And
Yeah.
it's acentic waveforms. Yes. I have slides here. You want me to dig them out? Or?
Among us, there is a chemist. We just had a presentation that you missed. Really nice from Beatrice. And I was wondering, in terms of chemistry, what is happening when you have this golden mean ratio, water going through the water nozzle? What happens to the chemistry of the water? What happens to the pathogens in the water? What happens to the chlorine or whatever they put in the water? What happens really? Because we know that dark CD is really potent to clear from all kind of pathogens. Is it the same with this water?
Well, what we could say for the perfected vortex in the imploder.com, which we call Schauberger's dream, is one of the primary mechanisms is clearly piezoelectric. Even Schauberger's vortex would not begin making electricity from gravity unless the water was piezoelectrically doped with, say, quartz rock powder, also required for biodynamic potentization. So when that vortex is piezo, then the implosion of capacitance is implosive and therefore negentropic. That's why imploders work so much wonderful with hard water. And yes, that result is, we had laboratory studies done on 2 continents. 60 to 80% of chlorine was eliminated. We know why. It's literally the heavy molecule that doesn't fit well is spun out first. So, and there probably is some antibacterial effect, but we don't advertise that. What we do advertise is hypersolubility and therefore bioavailability, reduced molecular cluster size, and therefore hydration.
Great. Can I ask a question? It's from the chat. Someone here is asking really about, would there be a relationship between the idea of perfect implosion and in relation to the ego and maybe overcoming the ego? Could they be related in any way?
Absolutely. In fact, most psychologists refer to their practices as the collapse process, and there's a good reason for that. If you're preparing for death or bliss and the preparation is the same, every emotion needs to become perfectly shareable. That is pure principle eureka and of service to the whole gene pool. And that is a process of compression. So, and that is how the collective unconscious is assembled as simply a library holographically of survival information. To get squeezed into that library, only pure principle survives. And so, yes, and what you call the collapse of the ego is the discovery of wave distribution perfected. Exactly. That if you ident I-phi, the perfect dent is phi ratio. If you ident I-phi with perfected distribution, then you identify with the entire galaxy. You know why stars are mindful, and then therefore your aura can become as big as that star. Absolutely. And my teacher, Bentov's Kundalini, was a specific example. His second book, The Cosmic Comic Book, was written because his aura became as big as the sun, actually. So that's ego. It's simply how big you identify with the field. And it starts with the implosive compression that enables you to radiate into the larger array.
Can I ask another one? And maybe after, if we could ask Patrick if he could make any clarifying comments, maybe on what Dan has shared. The last comment in the chat here is, it's referring to someone, Dr. Hulda Clark, and it's asking, what is the physics behind Dr. Hulda Clark's zapper? What would be the modern version of this device? Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah, Valerie's friend was very involved, and we had friends with Hulda Clark as well. Actually, I think their very low voltage bias was a way of enabling cells to switch toward alkaline, for example. It was a very low voltage device, but unfortunately, it was such low voltage that various environmental factors disabled many of them, I think. And most electrical engineers concluded there was no voltage at all, unfortunately. It was controversial. Hulda Clark was a wonderful doctor and pretty useful as a chemist. And under the right conditions, a square wave, which is what that was, will have a harmonic inclusiveness that approaches infinite. And the only truly infinite harmonic inclusiveness, obviously, is my equation, because that's the only non-destructive compression enabling infinite harmonic inclusiveness. And it's well known in medicine that harmonic inclusiveness is the primary way to measure immune health in heart rate variability, for example. So the harmonic inclusiveness, which defines the possibility of a square wave, which is what Helga Clark's device was, means if you get the square wave right, you can implode. And therefore, but all those principles were implicate and not explicit there. And so her devices, our friend Jason in Barcelona is building and selling them to this day. Actually, Valerie might comment.
Yeah, he has them made in Slovakia.
Yeah, we should share his website if people are interested.
Yeah.
And you know, under the right circumstances, but the signal is weak. But if you get the, for example, if you ground, then you're going to lose the weak wave. But that square wave has the potential to implode, yes, and be harmonic inclusive. So if you get the right square wave, that's the definition of alchem, you know, alchemy, access to a black hole.
Can I ask Patrick? Could you give some comments on what Dan has shared? Maybe that's relevant to your work, and in a way that is maybe more approachable and understandable for some of us without a science background?
Yes, sure. Maybe if I can share my screen like that, I can show you some slides also. It should be easier for me to explain.
Could you enable Patrick's screen sharing? Can you make him presenter so Patrick can share screen? Is this Valerie? Oh, good. It's done. Patrick, you should be able to share screen now.
Okay.
Because you were set to co-host.
Okay.
Yes.
You see my screen now?
Yes. Yes, go.
Yeah. So just to explain a little bit more about your question regarding chakras. Well, in fact, you know, there are a lot of people who try intuitively to make a relationship between the chakra and the different part of the body with specific frequencies. And one of the best guy for me, who made very beautiful work is Stéphane Cardinaux and Catherine Anaï-Martin. They're in Switzerland. They have a school of intuitive healing, intuitive feelings, and in fact, with their students during more than 1 year, they make every week an appointment, and then they were sending frequency to the body, and they were asking each of the students, where do you feel? And so they repeated a lot of times. They made some average of the result that they got, and they have made a beautiful map of the body with regarding to frequencies. And on this map, of course, there are the chakra, and well, maybe I can enlarge it a little bit. Yes. And what is really marvelous is that if you take down equation and the frequency, the frequency which are in relationship with golden ratio, so the golden ratio, and you see that the second chakra is fits exactly one of the frequencies of down ladder. And then there is another one for the heart, another one for the throat, another one for the top of the head. And if you go up in the external field of the body, it's amazing because you still find frequency of Dan equation. And one of them is just between the sacred masculine and sacred feminine, which is 2,300 Hertz. And you see, for each of the chakra, there is a perfect relationship with Dan equation. And this improves that when you're perfectly aligned, so when all of your frequency are in beautiful ratio, so all of your all of the different part of your body are in golden ratio, you have access to bliss. You have access to the perfect embedding of all these frequencies. I think
golden
it was
ratio
very
Golden ratio to Planck. That's wonderful, Patrick. Yeah, and you see it's enabling implosive compression, so the charge can go through, compressing all the way to the 0 point, and that enables the flow. It's beautiful. Thank you, Patrick. Very nice. Was there anything else? Anything else you had, Patrick?
Question. Could healing frequencies be transmitted to a collective of people, example, a town or bigger?
I could comment, but Patrick, was there anything else you wanted to share?
Well, maybe just, I'm looking in the...
Well, maybe I'll do Valerie's question. Well,
maybe to show an example of what you talk about, well, this is the famous 0.1 Hertz frequency, which is inside the body. And
Mayer wave.
yeah, this is, yes, that's what Dan talked about relating to the Mayer wave. Mayer wave is a pressure wave. It's inside your blood. And this Mayer wave can be measured with a small device you put on your finger, and you can see that when in fact the amplitude of this wave, which is at a frequency of about 6 times per minute, so 0.1 Hertz, is really related to life force. So when you're perfectly healthy and not stressed, you have a beautiful wave. When you're stressed and when you're not healthy, this wave is flat. So like that, you can see all the orange vertical lines are blood impulse, and you see there is a wave on the wave of the blood impulses, which is the pressure wave. And
that's
it's
a wave on a wave.
This is 0.1 Hertz, which is again related to Dan equation. And you have also, when you go to lower, I will show you another slide. Where is it? Here. In fact, when you take the Dan ladder here in Hertz on the left, as he said, you have the Schumann frequency. You have also Schumann frequency is just between alpha and theta brain waves. And if you go down to this ladder, and also on the other part here, which is in cycles per minute, which is much easier, you will find the breath of the child, the breath of the adult, the 0.1, the sacrocranial wave, which is get by a sacrocranial osteopath, also the 0.1 Hertz here, and also the frequency of the emptiness of the brain ventricles. And when you go down to this, on this scale, so the frequency of the emptiness of the brain ventricles is the breath, the very slow breath that yogi used when they're in bliss state. So it's a breath of about 1 time per minute, 2 times per minute, 1 every 2 minutes. It depends. There are different steps, which are each of these steps is on this scale here.
That's so profound, Patrick. I'm so grateful that you prepared that slide. When people understand what that means, not only have the brain waves and the breath waves and the heart waves and the spinal liquid, they all fit that cascade to implode. It's so useful. Thank you for preparing that slide, Patrick.
There was a comment from Shakti from Kavita. Do you want to express it yourself, Kavita? It was about Ben Bentoff. No,
yes. I just wanted to ask Dan if he said that his teacher was Itzhak Bentoff. Did I hear?
Oh yes, I knew him very well. Lived with him, worked in his lab. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, in fact, when he built the capacitive accelerometer to measure Kundalini, I was there, and actually I brought Elizabeth Rauscher there. And, we had a party. Yeah, and you know his work. In fact, he was with us at the conference in Florence with Bucky Fuller before he was on his way to the TM PhD lab in Switzerland to measure transcendental meditation with the leader there. Bentoff was amazing.
Fantastic.
That's all it. that story and his story related to my work is all at goldenmean.info/Kundalini with pictures and excerpts from his book, including how he actually, as he radiated into that array, he was conscious that he was wiggling the entire planet with his solar plexus and described it and knew what it meant and what it felt like and why. And that's what enabled his conversation with the sun, which became the cosmic comic book, which is literally Kundalini gone stellar.
So that's Golden Mean Kundalini.
Goldenmean.info
It's on the
slash
chat.
.info slash
Golden-
Kundalini.
That's right, goldenmean.info/Kundalini, including the 4 new professional films we just made about that work.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the question before, I forgot, there was one question you were, could the healing frequency be transmitted to a collective of people?
Oh yeah, yes.
Like,
Well, the TM people, they measured the critical mass, how many meditators it took to change the crime rate of a city. And so these things do have critical mass, absolutely. Yes, and in fact, when we did global Therify healing meditations and you switch on imploding plasma with intent at centers around the world, it was so powerful that the only reason we didn't do it again was because we didn't have the leadership ready, but it's very powerful for sure.
you can mention about the Therify, actually, the effect on the environment, how the people change even in the building and even the rate.
Well, you could tell that story, Valerie.
Also, this very effective in Australia, where they had this rate of emergency reduced to half the day when the clinic was running the Therify. Can you explain what has this effect?
Yes, it was our friend, the doctor there. He ran the emergency room directly across the street from the Therify Center, and they were very sure, they tested it a bunch of times, that the number of visitors to the emergency room in the hospital was an average of less than half on the days when the Therify was running. But I mean, there's too many stories about affecting the rain and the plants in the neighborhood. I mean, it's like, if a Therify plasma cloud gets happy, you don't have to turn the Therify on the next time, but you need a very biological environment to support that. But then that plasma cloud becomes angelic. It's a nature spirit, actually. That's how nature spirits form. It's living plasma.
This knowledge were known by the ancient, wasn't it? The builder of the cathedrals and so on, they knew all those things, the gold-mean ratios, fractal.
Yes.
How come Tesla, who was probably in connection or maybe extraterrestrial himself, why he missed those aspects?
He got a lot right, but he didn't get phase conjugation that Planck discovered. And I don't think although he got some ideas about longitudinal interferometry, he didn't get how the world grid worked. Or he could have recognized that he would be causing earthquakes with such high voltage. But that had been a mystery on this planet because so few people have even thought of the relationship between implosion and what makes a gravity wave. It's really Bearden who had the breakthrough. I must say, I started with him on that. When you understand that a longitudinal wave is the stuff of gravity waves, then you can begin to think about this, the relationship with the world grid and earthquakes, etc. And how a great aura feeds the earth.
Any more questions, comments?
Was that a happily ever after? I really wanted to thank you guys for inviting me and for sharing this, and let's make it shareable.
We started to have the idea, Rafi Sheka, to have a workshop on your material to understand it more in depth. If anybody wants to think the idea is good, let us know.
May I just ask, sorry, I'd like to just ask if Dawn, Lester, and David Parker are on the call now. They are actually our next speakers, and I haven't been able to see their names so far. That's Dawn, Lester, and David Parker. And they're our next presenters.
Yes.
Okay, so
the contacts.
We might have a little bit more time
Oh,
while we try to locate them.
okay, so let's pursue. I think, Patrick, you started to present something about your work. Is that a good opportunity to show more of what you do and what you have understood? Patrick is he's a biologist. He's worked, he ran elderly center, a center for elderly people, without reducing the chemistry. You want to talk about that, or maybe you have to go? Patrick?
No, no, it's okay. I'm still here.
Patrick, why don't you talk about how you talk to the plants? I thought that was fabulous.
You work with stomatic material and
Yeah, but well, yeah, we can also that.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, you know, I've learned sacrocranial therapy, and when you learn to feel with your hands, in fact, you after a while you can also feel it at a distance. So you don't need to touch the body to have the answer, and you can also do it for plants, for trees, and everything in the universe has some kind of breath. So when you're putting your hand on the trees, you can also feel this kind of rhythm which are coming out from the tree. And these kind of rhythm are about, let's say, a few times per minute. And it's very interesting because when you expand your feelings, you have access to a lot of things. And I think that it is really related to done work. And this is some kind of, well, if you can feel something at a distance, it should be related to longitudinal waves that Dan talked about. That's my feeling. That and it's possible. It's also explained telepathy. It's when you open a little bit your mind to these kind of things and you practice a lot, you can have access to a lot of different things, and you can also get information for plants, for almost everything, and also you can feel you can feel the breathing of the sun, which is a few minutes, about 5 minutes. And you can feel the expansion and then its contraction. Yeah.
Interesting. Ada, you would like to share your story about plants? Your plant story?
Oh, actually, we have David Parker here now.
Oh, okay.
And I think Dawn is probably there also. I'm just checking. So I think we can I just ask, David, are you ready to go ahead?
Yes, we are. So hopefully you can hear us.
Oh, yes.
That's great. Okay, let us just tie up our last presentation with a very big thanks to Dan Winter and for sharing this incredible knowledge and absolutely cutting edge understanding and science with us. And I know Dan's more familiar with speaking to a specialist audience, but it's wonderful that you're able to at least try to bridge the gap between the non-science world and with the knowledge and understanding that you have. So a big thanks to Dan Winter.
Oh, thank you. You're kind. Thank you. I appreciate the dedication of your group. Nice to be here. Thank you.
And thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, Dan.
And thank you, Patrick.
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay. Blessings. Bye-bye.
Blessing. Bye-bye.
Bye.